Hello. All right. Well, I think we're hoping, and more people seem like they're going to be joining us, but we're going to start because we appreciate you all being here on your Friday afternoon, and we don't want to waste a minute. We have a really packed afternoon. My name is Emily Broad-Lieb, and I direct the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard Law School, and I'm really thrilled to be here today. We've been organizing this event with folks from the Harvard Office of Sustainability, Harvard University Dining Services, the Harvard Food Literacy Program, and we're just excited to be kicking off this really exciting year. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what Food Better is and also about another initiative that is going on this year, which is the Harvard Dean's Food System Challenge, and then just give you a preview of what you're going to have in store for you today. So Food Better is a year-long cross-Harvard campaign that we're hoping will educate and engage people in issues around the food system. And Food Better came from this idea of there's all these activities in the food system. So how can we grow better, produce better, conserve better, choose better food, reduce better, conserve better, food better. So using food as a verb, there's all these actions we each take every day and every week that we want to be doing better across Harvard. And each month we're going to focus on a topic within the food system. So the topics that we've chosen for the year are people and labor in the food system, production, markets and distribution, health and nutrition, food waste, and then food and climate change. And those are the topics we're also going to be talking about today throughout. A few of them will be exhibited on our panel and then through the breakout sessions that we're going to have after this panel. This is the real sort of launch symposium for this year. We've had events this week leading up to this, and if you stay involved and visit our website, you'll see events all throughout the year on these topics that are going to get everyone engaged and really show all of the energy and all the amazing work already taking place across Harvard in these arenas. And I'm also excited because this symposium is not only the launch of Food Better, but also one of the first events this year related to the Harvard Dean's Food System Challenge at the Harvard Innovation Lab. So for those that you don't know, the Harvard Innovation Lab is a university-wide center. It's located by the business school, but it's really intended to be open to everyone across Harvard and equally so everyone can participate there. Every year they have challenges where they put out a call to the Harvard community and say, we have this pressing social issue and you are so creative and smart and innovative and excited. We want you to come up with solutions. And so this year, one of the challenges is the food system. We're challenging you, Harvard students and the Harvard community, to come up with solutions that will make the food system healthier, that will make it more equitable and more sustainable. So the formal kickoff for that is going to be at the iLab the evening of October 27th from 6 to 8. And so hopefully we're hoping today is going to give you just a taste of starting to talk about these ideas, start this conversation, and continue to get educated throughout the year, and then hopefully to participate in that challenge. And I want to stress to everyone that whether or not you win the challenge, because there are winners, actually there are 5 teams will be picked as finalists, and we'll have time during spring to work their ideas, continue working on them, and then someone will actually win a cash prize, some team. Whether or not you win, it's actually a really amazing opportunity to stay engaged in this topic, to learn how to work with people from across disciplines, and to really learn about innovation and enterprise and what it takes to implement your ideas into action. So I think it'll be a great experience for everyone who participates. And we're hoping, again, today you'll start meeting people and getting ideas and thinking about these issues so that you'll be really ready to go for that. So in order to kick off our year of Food Better, I'm going to shortly turn it over to our moderator and panel. We're going to have a panel started by Bernstein, who is the Associate Director of the Center for Health and the Global Environment at the School of Public Health. And Aaron is going to tell us about the food system kind of from the big picture and really give us inspiration for today. And then we're going to have a panel that goes through 4 of our main issues that we've chosen to focus on this year. Production, distribution and markets, health and nutrition, and then food waste. And each segment will be introduced first by a student. I'm excited our own Susan Zhu from the law school, who is in our program working on food waste issues right now, will be one of those. So each will be introduced by a student from across Harvard, and then we'll hear from a community member and innovator, someone from Boston or from Harvard that's really working at the cutting edge of these issues so that we can inspire you. After that, we're going to have breakout sessions that will be, one in this room will be people in labor, and the others will all be, if you go outside, you'll get directions to those. And then finally, a reception at Queen's Head from 5:30 to 7, which will be a chance to actually debrief, have fun, talk more, connect more. And I want to stress as well that we're recording the ideas from today, from the breakout sessions. This is really, you're giving us ideas as well for what you want to continue to hear about and learn about so that we can plan this whole year to really meet the needs and the interests of the Harvard community. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Aaron.
Thank you, Emily. Well, it's a great pleasure and actually an honor to be here with you this afternoon, to be at this launch of the Food Better campaign. And Emily told you a bit about me, but what she didn't tell you is that I'm also a pediatrician. I practice at Boston Children's Hospital. And I'm going to use my experience as a pediatrician to get at this question of what is a food system, which if you got 15 minutes and were asked to describe the food system, you'd probably do a better job than I'm going to do. But I think it perhaps goes without saying that 15 minutes is a pretty short docket for figuring out what the food system is. So I've been practicing at Children's for almost a decade now, and early on in my career there, I was working in the primary care clinic, and I was meeting a young girl. We'll call her Emma. She's about 7 or 8 years old, and one of my mentors, a wonderful guy, said, you know, Ari, the best thing you can do as a pediatrician is to praise a parent. So every opportunity you get, you should, when you see something you like, make sure you compliment it. And for the parents in the room, you know that getting a child who's of vaccine-eligible age into a pediatrician's office, especially when they remember it and can talk, ain't the easiest thing to do. So bribery is, you know, way up there on the list of things that work. So I was routinely facing parents saying, you know, if you sit down and stay still, we'll go to McDonald's, or we'll go get ice cream, or we'll go get a donut, or we'll get a big gulp, or we'll, you know. And Emma came into the office with an apple. And I was just floored because I hadn't been doing it very long, but it was an apple, and I'd never seen a child. And Emma was from Roxbury, which made it even more interesting to me. And so, being the curious guy that I am, I said, Emma, you know, what's that you have? So it's an apple. And I said, okay, well, you know, where'd you get the apple? She says, well, we went to the grocery store before we came here and got the apple. And being a persistent and stubborn type, I got a little more curious, and I said, where do you think the apple came from? And she looked at me, and she looked at the apple, she looked at her mom, she looked at the apple, she looked at me. She said, well, I just told you we were at the Stop and Shop in Brigham Circle. And I said, well, you know, where was the apple before it was at the Stop and Shop? Mm-hmm. To Emma, apples grew on the shelves of grocery stores. She had certainly read about them in books, but growing up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, she didn't know where apples came from. The Roxbury russet is possibly the oldest American apple, first cultivated in the early 17th century, named after Roxbury, Massachusetts. So here I was face to face with a 7-year-old who had probably made one of the most profound statements about food in the United States one could possibly imagine. And thinking about the story and thinking about what I was going to say today, the question occurred to me is how many people here have had a Roxbury russet apple? So you're definitely beating the curve here. I mean, this is like, you know, of the American population, you could probably take the number of people in this room and double it, and you might get the total sum of people who've had a Roxbury russet apple to say. And yet in its time, it was the most popular apple in New England because it stayed firm over winter, and it was a great cider apple. So you could press it and store it that way, and you could put it in your basement, in your cellar, and it would remain. One of the main reasons the Roxbury russet is no longer used is because of cold storage. And people didn't like the way it looked. It was russeted, and people wanted shiny apples. They didn't want russeted apples. So what can we learn from this experience with Emma? Well, I would argue that the reason we're all here today is the same profound point that happened in that room with Emma, which is that we have lost sight of nature. We, most of us, with the possible exception of people on our panel, don't have large-scale food production as our mission in life. We outsource that. And we have literally lost sight of the things that fundamentally determine our health. And as such, we have a system. We have a system that brings this essential thing to us, And we don't really understand how it gets there, nor do we have the mental space to think about that on a day-to-day basis. And so it's this disconnect that is, in my view, the food system. It's not about planting something and eating it. It's about a food system. And why do we have a food system? Because we have grown apart from this essential resource. Barton Seaver, whom many of you may know, who works at our center and is a well-known figure in the conservation of the oceans, once told me that everybody speaks dinner, which is a great line. And it's true on top of it. Food is perhaps the most powerful vehicle we can use to bridge our disconnect with food, which is extraordinary because everyone ate today, maybe not tomorrow, but everyone ate today. And through that experience, we are confronted with all the things that Food Better is dealing with. We're confronted with the waste issue. We're confronted with the production issue. We're confronted with the nutrition issue. We're confronted with the distributional issues. All of that becomes a part of our conversation. And our task, in my view, is to use food to bridge this disconnect. The risk we run is that if we speak to the problems too strongly, food becomes a problem. Food becomes a source of malnutrition. It becomes a source of conflict. It becomes a source of pesticide exposure. It becomes a source of a carbon footprint. It becomes a source of all the problems we face in a more broad basis in the world, and not what we enjoy and need to live healthy and productive lives. And yet we cannot ignore these problems that are staring us in the face and why you are here today. So I'm absolutely thrilled that this event is happening at this time in this place. I'm delighted you're here, that you will be engaged in this process and thinking about, because let me tell you, one of the fringe benefits of being at a university like this is there are a lot of smart people in the same place, and putting our heads together gets to solutions, especially when there's an incentive, faster than it might otherwise. That we have this opportunity to really engage on this extraordinarily powerful issue. Welcome.
Hello, my name is TJ Min, and I'm from the Harvard Kennedy School, but perhaps what's more relevant and important today is that I grew up on a farm in Western Illinois, and I've been asked to speak to you today on production or food production. Actually, I'm not going to be doing this bulk of the speaking, Mr. Jim Ward is, but production to me, coming from a farming viewpoint or a farming exposure, encompasses a lot, and Dr. Bernstein hinted about it, but a couple statistics that I think are relevant and important is in the time that I'll be speaking, which won't be much longer, 10 to 15 children around the world will die from malnutrition. In addition, by the time you go to sleep tonight, over 20,000 people will have died from hunger or hunger-related causes. And these are all based upon facts from the United Nations World Food Program. So production certainly has a lot of challenges ahead of itself. Right now, the world population is somewhere around 7 billion and is expected to reach 9 billion by 2050. So a more than 25% increase will be needed in production efforts to meet demand. Production does not involve just farming. That's kind of what I'm going to speak a little bit about, but it also involves processing, cooking, canning, and preserving that you may be doing, in your own home as far as producing that food that you will eat. The farm that I grew up on was a corn, soybean, mostly for grains. We farmed GMOs. I'm a huge GMO proponent and will be doing GMO research for my thesis this year. Additionally, we farmed animals as far as beef cattle, chicken, and pork. As far as the experience I've had since I've left the farm, I've been an Army officer and deployed to Iraq. And when I was in Iraq, I saw an interesting side of the production agriculture that I would not see here. I saw farmers out threshing wheat or cutting corn and harvesting the grain by hand. And I saw how labor intensive that was. I saw the irrigation ditches that were so inefficient. and the farmland that was just not used because of violence and other things that were going on within that country. So production has its challenges not only here in America, but across the world. And so I'm not going to speak too much longer on production. I'll pass it over to Mr. Jim Ward here from Ward's Berry Farm to give a more detailed description of food production. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I will talk a little bit about production and I was asked to talk about some of our challenges, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. But Aaron really sort of stole my thunder here, because that Roxbury russet comment is so apropos, because that was an apple that created an experience for me that I have never forgotten. It's really a fantastic apple. It's brown, russeted, and it is hard as a rock, and it's very sweet and full of incredible flavor. At the same time, it's not just sort of straight sweetness like a Red Delicious, and it has a much firmer texture. Best apple I've ever eaten. I had it at Allison's Orchard up in Walpole, New Hampshire, and it's really fantastic. But that brings me to, so we have a farm in Massachusetts here in Sharon, and it's 200 acres. My brother and I and a pretty good-sized crew farm it and produce small fruit. Like, we started with berries, strawberries and blueberries, and we've moved on and now grow mostly vegetables. Sweet corn and tomatoes are our big thing. And we've also do this entertainment agriculture. We were sort of we've tried not to go too silly with our entertainment, but we do tours for school groups every day, and we try to educate kids about what agriculture is, so that maybe they do know that an apple grows from a tree. And so that's where our business, that's sort of our business model. We have, let's see, our primary crops are strawberries, tomatoes, sweet corn, peaches, winter squash, and pumpkins. The top of that list is where I think I have my best opportunity. The top of that list being the tomatoes and sweet corn and peaches and strawberries. We're trying to create we're trying to give someone something that they can eat that will distinguish it from any other of its type that they've had. So a peach that's ripened on the tree and whose juices run down your arm when you eat it is something that you'll never ever buy from a chain store, and because its distribution chain is too long, and it needs to be picked very hard before, so that it never will get to that point if it's So I think we have an opportunity to really create a memorable experience for our customers, and that's where I see our great advantage. So that's not one of the challenges, but that we strayed so far from these experiences for so much of the population is what I'm worried about. We started farming in the early 80s. It wasn't a family farm to begin. My father bought land in 1981, and we've been farming it for now 33 years. The nadir of buy local was the 80s. It was, fast food and box food and processed food was so prevalent and such a big chunk of, became such a big chunk of everyone's calories in their diet that we lost track of the seasons. So the seasons are something that I've considered something that I want to re-educate people about. There was a time when people knew the season of strawberries was June, and that they would relish those 3 weeks in June that they could get strawberries, and they would go and pick strawberries, and they would make jam with strawberries. So those now that you can buy strawberries 365 days a year, no one even knows the season's June anymore. And people think our biggest corn selling day is July 4th. And that just doesn't make any sense. It's so frustrating to me and there are farmers in New England who go to these great lengths to have corn on July 4th when, the expression is knee high by the 4th of July. That's how big your corn is supposed to be. And that's what the day, the soil temperatures would dictate if you would just plant it on its normal schedule, but instead farmers go to great lengths with plastic and row covers to try to hit that market, because instead of trying to educate people that the 4th of July isn't when your best corn season is, they just try to meet that demand. And so we've strayed so far from where there was an intimate connection. Everyone had an intimate connection with the fields and agriculture, because there's so few of us are still involved in producing that now there's multiple generations of people that have a total disconnect from a farm and the apple tree. And so I consider that's a challenge that that I'm trying to sort of address by giving people that memorable experience and showing kids around the farm and maybe letting them taste, raw ear of corn right from the plant. It tastes pretty spectacular. It's sweet and it has great corn flavor and it's tender and it has that sort of snap to it. It's fantastic. And a tomato that's ripened on the plant that actually, it sort of hits places in your mouth with flavor that a tomato sometimes doesn't. People talk about red wine and the things that it can do in your mouth and the places that it hits for flavor, and I get the same thing from tomato, a great tomato, and these are things that I would like to get other people to know. So in any case, a little bit about the production. We do some innovative things. Margiana asked me to talk about the innovative things we do. I think production end of it is science, and it's the fun part and the easy part, sort of, because I find it so much fun. As advances are made, it's interesting, and the production part is less challenging to me than the distribution and sales part of my job, because I can sure grow a lot of zucchini. Just ask me when I came out of college. I planted a lot of zucchini, and guess what? Everybody else can grow zucchini too. And it was really, I got a business lesson in trying to sell zucchini to chain stores, to Stop and Shop. I would be on the phone begging him to take zucchini, and then when I finally got him to take the zucchini, the price would be $7.50 for a half bushel, and I started pushing numbers around to try to figure out what it cost me to produce, and it was costing me, $8, and that wasn't a good equation. So we had a group of teenage kids that we were working all together, and we squeezed efficiencies. We were field packing. I learned a lot. I learned a real lot, but I especially learned that I didn't want to grow zucchini. And in any case, so that's a challenge. The marketing is a challenge, but production can be a lot of fun. I learned after turning our soil in a traditional way for 20 years, we were depleting our soil's organic matter. And we have a sandy soil here in Sharon. It's nice and stone-free and flat, which I'm thankful for. Very sandy, though, and doesn't hold water, and organic matter and is such a fundamental part of all of the microbiology of the soil and your soil's health. And as this organic matter was depleted, my soil didn't hold water. We were having more trouble with plant diseases. There were the healthy flora that can compete with the pathological stuff wasn't there, and so we have taken a lot of strides lately to improve our soil's organic matter. So we do a lot of composting, and we grow lots of crops no-till, which means we don't turn the soil, and we plant right through a stubble of cover crop, and we try to the more you roll your soil over and you're exposing it to air and warming it up, and all the microbiological processes happen faster, and so you break down that organic matter. And so we've tried not to do so much tillage, and that's one of the things we do recently to improve our soil and the farm's health, and it's really made a big difference. So that's one of the sort of innovative things. It's done on broad acreage out west, but not very often here in New England. We were early adopters of IPM, which stands for Integrated Pest Management, and I was telling TJ beforehand, it's sort of it's funny to take much credit for doing things which are basically common sense, but the great things about the IPM program, and it's run by a cooperative extension, that it's certified by that, are that they've given us tools like traps and threshold numbers to catch some of our pests. So for example, corn earworm, we set up a pheromone trap in our fields, and we check it, we're asked to check it weekly, we check ours daily, to see how many moths are flying. It catches the male moth as it's flying around, and when we catch a lot of them, we can assume there are many female moths out there, and each moth can lay a couple thousand eggs, and they lay them 3 or 4 at a time on the silks of corn. And so one moth can do a lot of damage. And the corn earworm you're all familiar with. If you've bought corn, you've probably encountered one. And we try to avoid it, and it traditionally requires a lot of pesticides to control, or frequent pesticide application. And so this pheromone trap enables us to be cognizant of what's flying out there, and if we're not seeing, and the other thing that the IPM program direct runners do is that they establish a threshold so that we know below 15 moths a week, you won't have an economic impact. Actually, the number is 5, below 5, and so you won't need to spray. But if you're above that, then you're needing to spray. But the frequency depends on how many moths you're catching. So and just giving me all the information that I needed as far as how many days it takes for the eggs to hatch at different temperatures and so on. Those are things that the IPM program is part of, has done for us to help us reduce pesticide use. But I like to say it's common sense, but it's really good science, and that's the fun part. That part is easy, and because it's so interesting, I think. So I'm trying to think what are some of our other big challenges. Well, the marketing is our biggest challenge, but the complete demolition of the ag infrastructure around here is another big challenge. There are, tractor dealerships that there used to be a few, in every few towns there would be one. Many went out of business because there were so few farms left, and now most sell snow blowers and weed whackers and riding lawnmowers, and almost none of them sell tractor equipment. So there's very little ag infrastructure left around here. There's a great upswell of new farmers, so that's exciting, and maybe it'll all come back. And but I could go on and on, so I'll pass it on. There you go.
So as Jim Ward mentioned, marketing is a huge challenge. So I and Mary Alice will talk about marketing and distribution. I'm Onda Greeny, and I'm a student at the Extension School working on my master's in history, and I'm working on a startup. We're based out of the Harvard Innovation Lab, and what I'm spending my days and nights thinking about is coffee from Yemen and how to best position that in the market. So I'll start with a short story. So essentially, if you were drinking I see some Starbucks, some cups of coffee here. If you were drinking coffee 500 years ago, you can say, well, where did it come from? We know where the apple came from. And coffee, if you were drinking it then, I can guarantee you that it came from Yemen. And when you go to Starbucks and you buy your mocha frappuccino or your mocha drink, and they put an espresso shot into a cup of hot chocolate, you think that's mocha. When actually, in fact, mocha refers to Yemen's port Al-Mocha, from which coffee was shipped up from there up until the opening of the Suez Canal. And so when Europeans were first enjoying coffee, they knew it as mocha or mocha coffee. And they were also at the same time getting chocolate from the Americas, and they noticed this flavor profile that was chocolatey, bitter, kept you awake. And so then that evolved, and we're left with the mocha frappuccino of today. So that's my short marketing pitch for you all. And as far as my interest is really international development and U.S. national security. I used to be in the Air Force, and I've seen the pointy end of foreign policy, but then I've also, in my studies, observed how markets can also create economic growth and can create stability. So in Yemen, if we're able to grow the coffee sector, which is largely going to be dependent on telling the story of mocha and introducing the consumer to what is a remarkable coffee, we can grow their economy, and we can also be a targeted intervention in that young men who are unemployed foment political violence and instability. So through coffee and this interconnected food system, we can execute U.S. foreign policy even. And not only that, as far as sort of the more food perspective of food insecurity in Yemen, we see 47% of of a young Yemeni is food insecure or suffering from malnutrition. And if we look specifically at who are these individuals, they are children living on rural farms. And if we go into the provinces of Yemen, we'll see that 50, 60, 70% of kids are suffering from malnutrition. And if we're able to source coffee from these rural stakeholders, we are putting money specifically in the pockets of those individuals most needing it to solve their food insecurity. So here we can sort of think wider in scope and see, wow, food systems can be quite broad. So as far as sort of the marketing and then thinking about the effects, as far as distribution of our coffee, we are a premium product. And so it's less about focusing on the U.S. consumer, getting it in someone that's food insecure in the U.S. Nevertheless, I do have some good news for you all as far as the distribution, is that I will be serving some Mocha Origin coffee afterwards, so we can enjoy that. Oh. And now Mary Alice will tell us a bit about her efforts. Thanks.
Thank you, Anda, and thank you all for being here. My name is Mary Alice Riley. I'm the World Peace Food Hub and Food Access Coordinator at the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. I could talk about New Entry. I'm going to try and dive into World Peace as soon as possible, though. But a really integral part of the World Peace Food Hub is supporting the farmers that seek services through New Entry. And New Entry's mission is to strengthen local food systems by training and supporting the next generation of farmers. We have technical assistance workshops to help them become experts in their fields. We have business planning courses to help them develop really sound business models to then enter into the local food system as vendors. And the World Peace Food Hub is the piece of our programming at New Entry that improves economic opportunity for our farmers by marketing their produce all over eastern Massachusetts and in Boston. So this is a really important piece of the puzzle for getting farmers off the ground, particularly beginning farmers, so that they can make a real career and be able to support themselves and their families through farming. So what does the World Peace Food Hub do? We aggregate produce from our farmers. We bring together all their produce, and then we market it across eastern Massachusetts. And by bringing together all of their different harvests, we can expand their access to larger and more diverse markets than they would otherwise be able to do on their own. Many small-scale beginning farmers sell produce in farmers markets. They maybe run a really small CSA for 20 to 30 shareholders. And they may sell to restaurants. But at the World Peace Food Hub, we are able to access other customers, such as like wholesale purchasers in institutional dining or institutional kitchens. We're also able to partner with different community organizations who care about health and wellness with the communities that they serve. So we also are able to market the New Entry farmers' produce to food access programs in Massachusetts. And this means that our farmers, who are typically very limited resource, they have a more stable income and they have a better chance at establishing their business and at learning how to market their produce, at learning how to please their customers. And as the World Peace Food Hub coordinator, I kind of negotiate those new relationships and those new experiences. To start, I might talk a little bit about our farmers. They're limited resource because they're small scale. Many of them also have second jobs because they just can't afford to support their families on agriculture alone. So they don't really have time to develop customer relationships in the same way that like a dedicated staff person might be able to. Limited transportation. Boston is a community with affluent communities with people who will pay a premium for local food. If New Entry is located in Lowell, so our farmers aren't necessarily, they don't have the time, gas money to really access Boston as a real income source. And also we have a history of working with immigrant and refugee farmers. So many of them also experience language barriers as far as being able to market their produce in different spaces and to different customers. So there are a lot of challenges for our farmers as they enter the food system, and World Peace Food Hub tries to overcome those challenges, tries to overcome those barriers so they have a better chance. Who do we market to? World Peace started as a CSA program, so we are a multi-farm CSA. So we aggregate produce from 30 plus farmers each week. And that means that folks invest at the beginning of the season to be participants in that CSA program. And then each week throughout the summer and fall, they receive a box of produce that our farmers have grown. And that started at 40 shareholders in the beginning, and now we have up almost 500 shareholders at the moment. We distribute to 26 sites all over eastern Massachusetts and Boston. And these shareholders are investing in the local food movement while getting a great box of high-quality, fresh, local produce that our beginning and immigrant refugee farmers grow. So they really value not only the CSA program and that access to local foods, but they also are investing in the mission statement that we have, that they believe there's added value to buying and purchasing produce from some of the most marginalized farmers that are in the food system currently. We also sell to food access partners, and that's kind of the piece I'd like to focus on in a minute, because at first we started with the CSA, and then we realized with the infrastructure that we had in place, such as trucks, a delivery schedule that mid through all of Massachusetts, we have a pack site and a cooler, that we really wanted to make sure that we were also selling to other customers, because the CSA market in Massachusetts is pretty saturated. There are tons of CSAs out there. So how do we make sure that we have a really stable client base so that our farmers don't suffer when our CSA maybe, when our shareholder numbers maybe go down once a year or is fluctuating. So we, our food access partners are really important to us. In the last couple of years, they've really been a big part of how we've expanded our sales. We've partnered, we started a SNAP CSA program because we realized that many of the farmers we work with are also from food insecure communities. And so it was a little ironic to be selling really high value shares, high value crops in the city of Boston when the very communities that our farmers were coming from couldn't afford the same product. So we're really excited about our SNAP CSA program and how that makes the local foods that we procure from our farmers accessible to folks who can then use benefits to purchase the $10 box of produce that's really valued at about $25. We also distribute a lot of produce to senior centers. We have a couple partnerships with different community organizations, but so far the biggest base that we have is through senior centers. Senior centers do a lot of food access and health and wellness programming. They have a focus on a particular demographic, and they want to make sure that they're getting, good nutrition, good exercise classes. I mean, there's a whole gamut of programming that they do, and local foods can be a part of that. And so we have recently been able to partner with Leahy Clinics in Burlington and Peabody, who run free farmers markets for their seniors, and they come through and they get to take a little bit of the produce that our farmers sell home with them. And that has been really great because what we're doing in a kind of theoretical sense is we're linking limited resource farmers who are having an incredible, who face a lot of challenges to being successful in local food. We're linking them to kind of the underserved populations in Massachusetts that, the local food system is attempting to tap into, but it's taking time and it's taking a lot of innovation in order to make that gap and to really meet the needs of not just not just one particular socioeconomic group or one particular demographic, but really meeting the needs of all. And so we're trying to couple the CSA model, where we reach more of one group of people that have the means to afford or have the means to pick up a CSA box each week. And then we're kind of coupling that programming and that infrastructure to meet the needs of other groups too in Massachusetts. And I think that's about as much time as I have. But I'm really excited to talk more about what initiatives we can all take to look at food access and how to couple that with local food production and how to meet a whole diverse group of people. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelsey O'Brien, and I'm a graduate student at the Harvard School of Public Health. Nutrition is necessary for survival, health, and growth. Nutrients and nourishment vary around the world, causing some people to be undernourished, leading to underweight, stunting, and wasting, while others are overnourished, causing obesity. In academia, nutrition is studied on many scales: micronutrients, macronutrients, vitamins, foods, and diets. Some of the greatest academic findings include the harmful effects of trans fatty acids on cardiovascular disease, the value of vitamin D in preventing chronic disease, and the importance of folic acid on reducing neural tube defects. This information is widely disseminated in academic journals and to the broader public in the media, yet there is still a lot we do not know about the relationship between diet and disease. Controversy arises over the latest diet trends and the definition of a healthy diet. Media often generates confusion about healthy food choices, which results from conflicting political and commercial interests and opposing academic studies. Current evidence from researchers at Harvard suggests a healthy diet is high in fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, uses olive oil and canola oil as healthy fats, prefers lean meats to red meats, and is lower in dairy. Even with nutritional knowledge, our food decisions are often not fully rational or in the best interest of our health. Food preferences begin to form in the womb and persist throughout life. Our biologic desire for sugar, salt, and fat is very strong, and our food choices are highly influenced by culture, industry, access, affordability, allergies, convenience, agricultural systems, and values. Our current lifestyle also impacts our eating behaviors. Many Americans eat processed foods that are designed to be eaten on the run. One approach to counteract our cultural norm of rushing through meals is the idea of mindful eating, which uses principles of awareness and mindfulness to promote savoring foods. Harvard dining halls, for example, Sebastian's cafeteria at the Harvard School of Public Health, are beginning to embrace the idea of mindful eating corners, which is a space designated to unplug, unwind, and enjoy food guilt-free. Our next speaker, Michelle Gallant, is a registered dietitian who works at Harvard University Health Services and is active in educating and promoting intuitive eating.
Good afternoon, everyone. As some of our speakers have already alluded to, food can be a source of conflict. Many people today have very confusing relationship with food. They feel conflicted about their food choices because on one hand, we're hearing a lot of messages about, well, you better eat right to protect your health, and yet on the other hand, we have messages from food marketers that are promoting all these highly palatable foods that make it very challenging and difficult. And we have very busy lives, which make it difficult to have regular meals. So I do quite a bit of work with people who may be considered binge eaters or having had some other type of disordered eating with food, or who are dealing with obesity. And many people have struggled with this rule-based eating over their lives. What do I mean by that? Rule-based eating is eating in a way that something outside of you is telling you how much to eat, when to eat, what to eat. It's telling you, it's getting you to think about, should I eat that? Is that okay? Is that healthy? And that type of eating can lead to quite a bit of guilt about your food choices if you happen to eat one of those bad foods. So it's looking at food from a good food, bad food standpoint. Tends to maybe be a bit rigid or perfectionist. However, what's great about rule-based eating is that you know what you're supposed to do. There's structure and what you're supposed to do as far as how you're eating. However, when people are stressed, which most folks around here are, it's very difficult to sustain that rule-based eating approach. And especially when there are so many tempting, highly palatable foods out there. And so then someone might be drawn to overeat those foods and then feel guilty about that. And then that leads to more eating. So it's a cycle that continues around and around of dieting or restricting food intake in some way to craving foods, maybe to deal with emotional stress, or just because they're around, or because we're all socially triggered to eat by each other. We follow each other's pace, we pattern ourselves after other people, because food and eating is a social thing, right? We can't get away from that. And so then a person goes from that rule-based eating or rigid eating into what I call overly permissive eating, where things become very chaotic, and maybe there are no regular meals. It might be that a person is just eating beyond fullness regularly and not really thinking about their food choices. So it's kind of a I don't care type of an attitude that develops. So this black and white thinking really doesn't work long term. People who diet actually tend to gradually ratchet up their weight over the years and tend to be more preoccupied with food. And I see this all the time with the clients that I work with. So much preoccupation with food and weight that could be better served by unleashing their brilliance into something that is important to them in their lives or for the world. So in comes intuitive eating, mindful eating, or something called eating competence. And there's a few basic components to this. Number one is being reliable about feeding yourself. Now that might sound very simplistic, right? Well, of course I'm going to feed myself. If you had a toddler with you, you would make sure that toddler got lunch, right? You wouldn't stay at the library or stay in the lab or keep working through lunch every day until you're starving, and then the only choice you have is the vending machine downstairs, which doesn't exactly offer baskets of broccoli, right? So with being reliable about feeding yourself it means making eating important, making it a priority. And we used to have, our culture doesn't support that. We used to have support for that, where everything would stop at mealtime. Other countries, if you've lived in another country, you might have experienced that, where people stop at meals, they take 2 hours maybe for lunch, well, maybe not that long, but they take time for lunch and they make it a social activity. Really important, really rewarding meals they're providing for themselves. And getting to be reliable about feeding yourself takes quite a bit of organization, and that's one of the things that I help people with quite a bit, is how to get organized around grocery shopping and meals and providing for yourself. Another aspect of intuitive eating is, this might sound a little radical, to give yourself unconditional permission to eat anything. Well, that feels a little scary to some folks, because that means that, well, then you feel like you're going to slip into that overly permissive place. Actually, what happens is when that cookie is no longer a food to be feared, you know you can have it any time. It's not the Last Supper, the only time you'll ever get to eat it. You can savor it and enjoy it and be done with it. The other aspect that helps you regulate your intake is to start to tune into your body signals of hunger and fullness. When you're hungry, make sure you eat. Also, notice what your stopping place is. So often people have very little time to actually sit and eat a meal, And so they're inhaling their food in about 5 or 10 minutes when the brain takes about 20 minutes to be notified that you've actually eaten. And when you tune into your body signals that can tell you when to stop, that helps you regulate your intake. And we all knew how to do this when we were little. I have a grandniece who was trained before she could speak to say more for food, and I'm done when she was finished. And one day she did, I'm done, mid-bite. That's how close you can get it for yourself if you start tuning in and paying attention. So you balance out that permission to eat by honoring your body signals, by being reliable about feeding yourself, and by enjoying food. When we look at traditional foodways, that's what food was about. We can't separate that. Our appetite is one of our life-giving drives. If you've known anybody who's been at the end of their life, who just, they don't want their favorite food. The family makes their favorite dish and they don't want it. That's one of the life-giving things that we have, but we're always fighting against it. And our hunger, we have multiple systems in our body that make sure that we eat. In our brain, our guts, throughout our body, making sure that we get something to eat. So how do we balance that out? Intuitive eating, mindful eating, taking some deep breaths before you eat. It can be as simple as that. Noticing the tastes and the flavors of food, even smelling food, which we don't do very often, so that you can get maximum enjoyment out of food and actually find out that you don't really crave those highly palatable, overly processed foods. You'd be just as happy with that delicious apple or that fruit or salad for a meal. And I have seen that repeatedly with my clients, that intuitive and mindful eating can be a very helpful way for people to eat well, feel good about themselves, and have less pressure around their eating. So thank you. I'll turn it over now to Susan.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to the Food Better launch. My name is Susan Zhu. I'm a 2011 graduate of the college, and I'm currently a second-year student at the law school. So this semester, I'm working with the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic with Emily and Ona on promoting laws and policies to reduce food waste. So every year, 40% of the food that's produced in America actually goes uneaten, and most of it ends up in our landfills. American consumers alone throw out about 160 billion pounds of food every year, and food is also wasted in fields, in schools, in restaurants, manufacturing plants, and markets. So let me give you an example, because when I hear food waste, I thought it was this gross thing that no one wanted to eat. So yesterday I was actually at a Food Law Society event, and Doug Rauch, who's a former executive of Trader Joe's, was speaking. He actually has a new enterprise called Deli Table in Dorchester, and you should check it out. But he was talking about romaine lettuce. And so how many of you have seen these bags of romaine lettuce at a store, right? They come in like 2 or 3 heads per bag. And he was saying that there are a lot of heads of lettuce that get left behind on the farms because they're either too short or too tall to fit in the bag. So there's nothing wrong with this lettuce. It's edible. It's just the wrong height, and it never makes it into the consumer's hands. They actually get plowed over and use a lot of water to grow lettuce, so that's sort of an idea of what food waste looks like. So markets will do something similar. They'll like people like shiny apples, and so if something has a cosmetic defect, they might throw it out. So you can think about all those poor, ugly fruits and vegetables that go unloved and uneaten every year. So what can we do about it? There are a lot of ideas for how to tackle food waste. To begin with, you can reduce the amount of waste that you start with. You can reuse it as animal feed. You could redistribute it to maybe the 48 million Americans who have an unreliable source of affordable food. I'm going to talk about 2 of the ideas that we're working on at the clinic. The first has to do with expiration dates, and this will hopefully help to reduce the initial amount of food waste. And the second is about tax incentives, so redistributing it to those in need. One of the leading reasons for the large amount of wasted food in America is our expiration date policy. I'm just going to conduct a survey right now. So let's say that you have a jar of tomato sauce, and on it it says, use by October 1st. Today is October 3rd. How many of you can raise your hands, would still eat it today?
All right.
Shouldn't have used this on an educated audience. Okay, well, how many, if it said sell by October 1st, how many of you would still eat it today? Okay, I was hoping that, anyway. So actually, a lot of people will assume that there's a difference between printing the words use by and the words sell by, but that's not actually the case. Last year, the Food Law and Policy Clinic published a report called The Dating Game, finding that consumer confusion about expiration dates leads to a significant amount of waste in America. So there's no actual defined difference between use by or sell by, best by, or my personal favorite is enjoy by. There's no binding federal rule on expiration date labeling, and state and local practices vary greatly. So there's a lot of inconsistency and sometimes just straight up arbitrary printing by manufacturers. And because Americans treat the expiration dates as scientifically linked to the safety of their food, a lot of safe and edible food gets thrown out every year. So the clinic is working with members of Congress to write legislation that would set federal guidelines on expiration dates to decrease the amount of safe, edible food that's thrown out every year. The second project, and the one that I'm working on, is about federal tax incentives. So some businesses can get a tax deduction if they donate surplus food to nonprofit organizations. Right now, that only applies to C corporations, and so those are corporations that are big, so your Walmarts, your McDonald's, your UPSs, your Microsofts. So that leaves out a lot of small businesses and small farms who do not get tax deductions if they were to donate their food to nonprofits. So we're advocating for federal legislation that would extend the tax deductions to all businesses, regardless of their size. And one of the nonprofits that takes all these food and gives them to those in need is Food for Free. And so I'm here to introduce Sasha Purpura, the Executive Director of Food for Free.
Hi. As she said, I'm Sasha Purpura. I'm the Executive Director of Food for Free, and I will repeat a little bit of what was just said, because before I tell you about what we do, which is essentially take that problem that is food waste and turn it into a solution for another problem, which is hunger, I want to give a little bit more of a picture of where and how that food waste is taking place. So we heard that 40% of food doesn't get eaten. Imagine you're having a cookout and you go to the farmer's market and you pick up a dozen corn and 10 tomatoes to make a salad. When you get home, you take 4 or 5 of those corns and you throw them away before you cook the rest. And you take 4 of those 10 beautiful heirloom tomatoes and you throw them away before you chop up the rest. That's what's happening. I mean, that's the reality of 40% of food not getting eaten. And we can address some of that. We can't address all of it. So you heard a little bit about a farm and the size of the lettuce head. Farmers are also, they're trying to run a business and make a profit. So if I have green beans and I send my staff out to pick green beans, these numbers will be made up. Say I send them out there for an hour in the beginning, they come back with 100 pounds of green beans. A few weeks pass, or the next picking, maybe they come back with 80 pounds for that same hour because there are less beans. And slowly the amount of food they're going to bring back each time they go out there is less for what I'm paying them, and it becomes non-profitable for me. And so I plow that back into the soil. So that's taking place at the farm. As that food gets distributed, I don't know if anybody ever saw, there was a story at one point about McDonald's driving our potato industry because they want standard-sized potatoes. So as all this food gets trucked across the nation, a lot of it does get rejected. And every day you have truckloads of food being rejected either because it's misshapen potatoes or for whatever reason, and literally getting dumped somewhere along that truck's route. Then it gets to the supermarket. And nobody wants to buy that last head of lettuce. So supermarkets really are trained in order to increase sales to have rich, fruitful, you walk into a Whole Foods and there's lots of lettuce to choose from and lots of kale to choose from. And I heard something recently that you can literally see by a store's waste. I mean, if there's very little waste, they are probably not doing a good job because people want to see bounty. So they stock a lot more than it's going to sell. And particularly with produce, because it's perishable, a lot of that is going to turn around quickly and go to waste. Furthermore, Whole Foods isn't going to sell you, hopefully, usually, a head of lettuce that's going to go bad in 2 or 3 days because you're paying full price. But that day 1, 2, 3, it is perfectly edible lettuce. And I imagine anyone in this room would eat that lettuce if you like lettuce. So all that, one more thing, you take it home, right? So I go to the farmer's market when the tomatoes and the eggplant and the corn is in, and I just want it all. And I take home way more than I'm maybe going to be able to cook during the week because it looks so good and I don't account for an event this evening or something else. And unless I'm really careful, I look in the fridge a week later and the kale is bad or the arugula is getting all slimy. Cooking. You cook a lot. I'm real good with leftovers, but a lot of people can't or don't eat leftovers. They cook a bunch of food, they eat what they can, and they get rid of it. They get rid of the rest. And now let me scale that up, and we'll take Harvard as an example. There's a lot of dining halls, 14 dining halls, and that's a lot of students being fed, buffet style. So now you are cooking a lot of food to make sure that these students who came in and paid for their meal plan don't walk up to a buffet table and see that there's no food left. And no matter how hard you try, there is no way you're going to be able to perfectly figure out how much beef stroganoff to make and how much salad. You have to make extra. You can get better and better at it, but there's always going to be extra. And Harvard is one of how many universities in just this area, or hospitals, or corporations. So that's where all this food waste is coming from. Food for Free started back in 1981 with that store waste, with that produce. And it really was just some Cambridge residents that saw that food going to waste and recognized there's this other issue, which is hunger. Hunger in the United States can be confusing because it often equates with obesity. It's not necessarily a lack of access to food, it's a lack of access to nutrition. So you can get a lot of empty calories for little dollars. The good calories, the nutritious calories, for lots of reasons, tend to be more expensive. And so the people who are hungry are actually in need of healthy foods. And it's this produce that I was talking about that so often goes to waste. So these women, or these Cambridge residents back in '81, saw this problem. They started picking that food up at the stores and bringing it to the agencies, food pantries, meal programs, youth shelters, to give it to the folks who needed it. And just to put that in context, in Cambridge, in this wealthy city of Cambridge, 42% of school children, 42%, almost half of the school children in Cambridge, qualify for free and reduced meals. I don't know if everybody recognizes how much hunger and poverty exists in this city that is a very wealthy city, but it does, and we see it all the time with the organizations that we serve. 42% of children are having a need to get help getting nutritious meals. So Food for Free, as I mentioned, started in '81 doing that with produce. Now, if you think about the people that we're reaching with, and let me say we've grown a lot since, and last year we distributed over 1 million pounds through that program of food, and 70% of that was fresh produce, which is fantastic. It's getting it to the folks who most need it. But the folks who most need it in some cases are homeless, and they don't have a kitchen, or they are working 3 jobs, and they don't have time to cook. And so, great if you can get them bananas and apples and oranges, but they're not always going to be able to create these nutritious meals. We struggle with it, right? We were talking about earlier. We struggle with the time to create nutritious meals. And that brings me to a partnership I want to talk about that we recently started with Harvard that is actually addressing, again, at a new level, that issue of food waste. And we talked about the dining halls and all of that. I don't know how many students in the audience? Okay, and how many have the eat at the Harvard dining halls? I mean, it's good stuff. We've been offered in to taste some of it, and it's good, healthy, nutritious meals, and I'm sure many of you can speak to that. So back in June, we sat down with Harvard and a third party and said, what can we do with this food? Is there some way to actually make use of that? And Harvard was trained up on how to prepare that food in a safe manner, so flash freeze it in food-safe bags, to enable Food for Free to come get it and do what we were doing in the past with produce, bring it to the folks who need it. And it's been a great exercise. We were doing with Annenberg over the summer. That's the one dining hall that's open throughout the summer. And so at the end of each meal, all of that food, the soups, the salads, the stews, the fried calamari, all of it gets flash frozen. And the next day, Food for Free comes by with our trucks, and we pick up hundreds of pounds of really good food. And then we take that either back to our freezer to distribute later, or we take it directly to the Cambridge Community Center, or to the Salvation Army in Cambridge, or to On the Rise. Last week, we distributed 3,100 pounds of food. And it's been between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds a week, because it's 14 dining halls. And Harvard's working to bring that number down, but it's always going to be a significant number. But instead of that food going to compost, that's over 2,000 meals that we picked up last week and brought to individuals within this community and surrounding communities. One university, and 3,000 meals a week. And just think of, and thank you, Harvard, for that. There's a food waste ban that went into effect a couple of days ago in Massachusetts that is encouraging organizations, or basically saying you'll be fined if you send to landfill more than a ton a week of food. So this is an incredible incentive. I mean, Harvard started this before the food waste ban started, but it's going to be an incredible incentive to do the similar things with all the other large institutions around here and really make a dent in that issue of sort of lack of nutrition in our communities. So thank you.
So now it's your turn. I hope your minds were as stimulated as mine in listening to what I think is a pretty extraordinary array of presentations. So please, questions. Well, I'm delighted it was that clear. Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for speaking, especially the students. There was a lot of cross that was happening between different speakers, but just kind of from TJ's point, and then going to the farmer, I felt like there was two sides to that conversation. The conversation on more production, then we got this whole conversation around waste, and it just didn't feel like those were reconciling. And then there was that, and then I'm curious from the farmer's perspective, how you're seeing these other programs in terms of the impact on farmers. So you and you right next to, do you participate with that? Or is that competition? Or how does that affect your pricing? And it feels like there's a lot.
I don't, we do participate in a program, we market in a lot of different ways, and I've participated in a bunch of different programs, not quite the same, but similar programs. And I don't treat it as, there's such this market that we're sitting in here, this local market, Massachusetts in general, there's just plenty of, it feels like plenty of consumers out there, and so I don't consider it sort of competition. I think there's lots of opportunity. These guys are supporting farmers that are, some of them recent immigrants that are needing just a little foothold to really to flourish and to show their community, it's a little bit about their culture or a little bit about agriculture. I think all good stuff. So I'm a full supporter.
Can I just add another sort of connection here? So Ward's Farm sells at several farmers markets, and at the end of every farmers market, Food for Free comes, because these guys and the other farmers, in many cases, they brought a ton of food that they want to sell because they want to stock their shelves too. And some of them don't have markets the next day, so some of that may go back and go to chickens or animals or compost. And it's a long day selling at a farmer's market, and packing up stuff to bring it back, to put it there is not always so great. And they've been incredibly generous along with the other farms at the farmers markets. We're helping them and they're helping us. They're taking that food that didn't sell and they're putting it in our trucks and getting the freshest, most nutritious foods you can get, local foods, the next day is going home in the hands of folks. So there are connections, and it was the first time I'd seen a good connection between food access and local farming, because the challenge is price, right? Farmers need to make a living. Food access, you're dealing with people with the least amount of money, but there actually are ways to start to tie that together.
And I would say that within the local food system, there is even a really great amount of diversity. So Wardsbury Farm, which is 200 acres, in comparison to some of the farmers I work with who only grow on a quarter acre or in their backyard, that's just a completely different operation. And so the difference as far as like, can we also recognize the diversity within local farming communities and who those farmers are and how their businesses, 200 acres versus a quarter acre, how they're really, really distinct from each other.
And you asked about the disconnect between production and distribution. Production too much or wanting to produce more. And I don't have an answer, but I have heard several times that it's not production, it's distribution. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah, so thank you all for, it's been really, really interesting. One thing I have a question about is, in the US and developed economies, I think it's really interesting how poverty and obesity are very closely linked. So a lot of people are simultaneously overnourished in terms of calories, but undernourished in terms of really healthy foods. And I've had experience, working in or volunteering in a soup kitchen where a lot of the clients were actually obese, but because we couldn't give them the food that they really needed. And so how do we kind of deal with that and reconcile those things and make sure we're getting the right foods to the people who need it?
So part of our mission is to do just that, and it is a challenge because of the things I said. I mean, in some cases, you have to address poverty is the issue, and there's components that are having financial access to these foods, kitchens, utensils, time. There are so many different factors, education, knowing how to cook. We have that problem in wealthy, when I've worked at farmers markets, people don't know what kale is. I mean, they do now. Everybody knows what kale is now. Now they don't know what collards is. But I think that part of it are things like, let's take this problem of waste, let's solve two problems at once and use that food. I think a big part is what Harvard's doing, because now you can get around some of those other challenges. But at the same time, you have to address poverty, you have to address education. There's just so many components.
I'll take a stab at that, because as a pediatrician, I see plenty of obesity in poor children. And I think the fact the United States led the world as the first nation in the history of humanity where poverty was associated with overweight is an interesting problem. It's obviously, obesity is not a single solution kind of problem, but at a very deep level, we have essentially as a nation established policies that create a framework in which the unhealthiest foods are the cheapest. And that's the fundamental problem. That's really at the core of our obesity epidemic in the United States. And yes, it's about physical education. Yes, it's about food deserts. Yes, it's about all these things. But fundamentally, the reason why we have an obesity problem is because we have not paid for the externalities in terms of some of the most unhealthy foods. So we're got huge pollution problems from our production systems that we are not paying for, although we are paying for in our wastelands. And we subsidize some very unhealthy things, which is, it was interesting, I hadn't heard the point about how tax subsidies are in place, in this case, for C corporations, but not for small ones. So we're even incentivizing the biggest companies, which have the biggest incentive to have the maximum, if you're a publicly traded company, you have to generate the maximum amount of profit in the shortest amount of time, which isn't consistent with the nature of nature, right? So, we're at a point now where the system is teetering, both in terms of distribution and in terms of the supply, in terms of the health of the population. And so the rubber's hitting the road, and we have to make hard choices about whether we're going to cut off ties to some of the subsidies and ways of doing business that have gotten us the system we have, versus not, and continuing on this track of having a very difficult to work with food system. Yeah.
Actually, what you're talking about makes me think of I went to a rally last week for food policy action, and the Let's Talk About Food Festival, where they talked about this scorecard that just got released that scores all the representatives and senators, all of Congress, on their voting in terms of food policy. And senators spoke there, really interestingly talking about how Congress is really far behind. They call like vegetables, regular vegetables like peppers and stuff, specialty crops, and then there's the subsidies. So I'm just wondering,
there's a lot of other things she said that was fascinating about Congress and their ideas on food. That's what I'm learning right now. So I'm just wondering, there's a lot of great work and a lot of great information you all have presented. What sorts of suggestions do you have or ideas do you have about kind of addressing how food policy is conducted? Because I love that there's these things that are doing in the city, but at the end of the day, you're right, all the money is going to subsidies, and it's not like Congress is kind of paying attention to all the research or what's going on.
I can't speak too much about food policy, but I do know I'm the beneficiary of some recent legislation. Susan, maybe you can help me. I don't know the name of the law, but in Massachusetts, the Greater Boston Food Bank is required to spend, I think it's 6% of their annual budget on locally produced food, which has been, for me, a great thing. And so when I foresee a surplus of something, tomatoes coming next week, we email the food bank and we give them a real attractive price, and but it is a price they're paying for the product, and they're meeting they're looking for quantity also, so they buy pallets of things. Actually, when I met the woman at the State House that was buying for the food bank, she said, "Do you put your produce on pallets?" I thought it was a strange question, but that basically, she was trying to find farmers that could produce enough stuff for them. They really do buy a lot of stuff. So in any case, we were bringing, once a week or so, maybe even twice a week to the food bank and being paid for it. Usually I would put our price right up just above our production costs so that we could keep things moving, keep things fresh, and the food bank and hopefully the needy people that it was serving were being given nutritious stuff. So I thought that was policy that was really effective. But anyway, so that's not something that we need to do, but it's something that's already been done.
I know this is probably a controversial topic, but what's your take on GMOs?
Mm-hmm. To me?
Well, I guess anybody.
Okay. I'm confounded, honestly. We don't grow any GMOs on our farm. It's not because I consider them, evil and the end of the world coming here. It's easier for the various people that are facing the public to say, no, it's not GMO, than it is to engage in a long conversation whose results, I can't really, I don't consider myself knowledgeable enough. I know that to eschew all science and advances would be a foolish thing, and there are people being fed around this planet because of GMOs. I've spoken to people who have, who have something to gain from GMOs. A salesman from Syngenta who told me that, there are GMOs that are creating corn that can withstand drought to such a degree that it, can be grown in parts of Africa that would otherwise not be very productive land, and that millions of people could be fed by these things. And so there are some great advancements that might be had. I also was under the impression that the first GMO was this Roundup Ready corn and Roundup Readiness, and that's a fallacy. I recently learned that it was for curing a disease called papaya ring spot virus in papaya, and papaya might not be a staple around here, but it is a staple food to people in the tropics. And so, and now there's not a papaya on the planet that's not a GMO. And if you savor papaya, then you have no choice. And so these are things that I knock back and forth, and then I hear all the things about the Roundup Ready corn and the pollen blowing across into somebody's field, and then they save their seeds and they're being sued by Monsanto and those stories, and those are troubling. we don't raise GMOs, but I see that there's definitely a bunch available, and some of them would reduce pesticide use on my farm. But we haven't chosen to do it yet. I'm sort of waiting to see where it all falls out.
Does anyone else want to chime in on the GMO question? That's a mouthful to go through. Yeah.
I wanted to ask all of the panelists, in a room of students who are maybe thinking about coming up with an innovative idea and trying to tap into some good sources of information to find good ideas. I feel like you all have a wealth of experience. If you could name one thing that you wish there was a technology to solve it or a service to solve it, what would be the thing that really irks you? And you're like, God, I wish someone would do something about that.
So we're struggling with something right now, and it relates to what we were talking about. We're picking up this incredible food every day at Harvard, 3,000 pounds a week. And we are working very hard to figure out how to distribute that food because, and this is, I keep saying it, one university, there is going to be so much food available. There is not currently a straightforward way for us to distribute that. We've been working with a lot of different agencies that are helping us understand what works and what doesn't. Some of the challenges are this food comes in big bags, so we can't give it to a food pantry because people don't want to bring home a bag of soup for a month. They can't really distribute to individuals who come for a bag of groceries. Some meal programs, soup kitchens, part of their mission is to build community, so they want to do their own cooking. But there's plenty of places that are serving meals. I went to visit St. Francis in Boston, and they serve 500 meals to the homeless every day. And they can't, she said, you know what? Because we don't get 500 of the same meal from Harvard. We get a lot of different kinds of foods. And she said, we can't, our clientele can't handle choice, so we can't put it out for them to make choice. There's going to be issues. And most of the agencies that we're giving the food to are not highly funded. There's a lot of volunteers. They're strapped. And so to sort of switch things up so they can deal with how are they going to change their process to serve all of these different foods is challenging. Some are doing it great. Lowell there's a transitional place in Lowell that serves 500 meals a day, and they love it. They're coming and picking up as much as they can every week. So we are working with Harvard and with the city and with some organizations to start to address this challenge. One of the things we've talked about is how great would it be if you could take these big bags of food, and we've talked about it with the Cambridge Community Center that sees families all week long. How could we reheat it, package it up into nutritious meals that the kids can take home and sit down at the table with their family and eat that night? And I mean, that's not a new technology, but it's a system that doesn't exist right now. And we are determined, if possible, to figure out how to find or create that system with partners in the community. But there is a tremendous amount of food available if there was distribution. In this case, again, it's distribution. There is plenty of food. I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about right around here. A tremendous amount of food that if we had a way to distribute it, there are plenty of people who need to eat it. So if any of y'all solve that, please, I will happily speak with any of you and work with you and show you what we're doing. And
I would love to have fruits and vegetables available just as readily as fast food and other highly processed things.
candy bars.
And candy bars and all of
Chips.
that. Access, for all levels, not just for people that are low income, but for everyone to be able to have that be as appealing. I would love to see more advertising of that food, because when you were talking about poverty and food choices and obesity, they're subjected to the same marketing that all of us are. And what are they selling with that food advertising? They're not just selling the food, they're selling, you're gonna be young and thin and beautiful and happy and just feel really great if you eat this particular food, right? And your kids are gonna love you because even though you're working 80 hours a week, they can put Hot Pockets into the microwave and feed themselves. Isn't that great? So I would love to have campaigns around food, whole foods that make people excited about
Kale.
eating barley,
I think one thing I've been thinking a lot recently is kind of touches to what Sasha was saying, was like what kind of relationship building goes into meeting people's needs and meeting the resources that they have available so that they can really effectively use any free meals or produce that they are given or that they purchase. And I think, you know, in the world where our markets and our economic system are really work around immediate gratification and being able to get what you want at that moment. And, you know, with an easy transaction of money as opposed to what is actually a fundamental barrier that prevents that person from being able to take lettuce that we distribute at the senior center and turn that into a meal. What kind of, how can we ensure that folks are empowered to use that food, that they have the resources they need to use that food, and how much investment on my part as a food hub coordinator, what do I need to do to really interface with our customers to know that we're meeting their needs? And when I'm scrambling to just make a program run, how much time is there? There's only 24/7 in a day, and then you have an 8-hour workday, which turns into a 12-hour workday. How do we do that well, and how much time and investment do we have to really put into people and relationships to get there?
I would like to resurrect pickling. I think,
It's coming, it's happening, yes. It's happening now.
I think pickles are great, and I think that pickling was more traditional a while ago, and it addresses a seasonal bounty that is annually there. We always have a point at which, and I can never tell you very many weeks ahead of time, but there'll be a point when these plants, cucumber plants, tomato plants, where they'll just overwhelm me with their productivity, and then that's when some of the worst food waste goes on, and we scamper around, try to sell it at various avenues. We use as much as we can in our kitchen, but I want to resurrect pickling, and I also want to see a blue Hubbard squash in everybody's cellar and for the winter, because that was a staple food in February 100 years ago. Before refrigeration, that would have been something that would have been an important part of everybody's garden and life. And now no one even knows what it is. It's an oddity that we sell as an ornamental now, and no one even eats it. So
It's great to see fermentation making a comeback. I had watermelon rind pickles a couple of weeks ago. It was so good. And who would have thought to make, and that's like something you would just normally throw out, you know?
So join me in thanking our panelists. It's given us a good stimulation to move into the next part of the afternoon. Did you have a question?
I was just going to add, solar dehydration is one of the most efficient things. Every farm should have a dehydrator right there.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Chips cost $6 for 2 ounces. You know, insane. 2 ounces of kale chips.
So on that note, we invite all of you to join us for the roundtable discussions, which will be out in the space, the hall, just outside of this room. There are 6 topics. And you will have the chance to participate in 2 different conversations. So we'll have 20 minutes in one conversation. I will ring a cowbell, and then you all can get up and move around to a different conversation. So there's people and labor in the food system will be in this room. And directly outside is production and distribution. And then if you just go to the hallway on your left, that's where nutrition, climate change in the food system, and food waste are. So please join us for that, and then in about an hour, we'll all head over to the Community Head Hub for a reception and a chance to chat informally.
Can I ask a question? I thought this panel was wonderful, and I'm already thinking of all the people I wish could have been here. Is this going to be on your website, or I see it being videoed? Will this be available?
Yes,
we're videotaping it. I think the intent is to make it available on YouTube, and you know, as Emily said, we're just starting the conversation, and our hope is that, for example, every single suggestion and idea that came up in the panel, maybe we have an educational opportunity to do that, whether it be a pickling, you know, a cooking class
And one of the key questions as you break out into the discussion sessions is how do you want to food better, and what are the particular challenges that we feel really strongly about in this